All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Civil War Seattle and another live stream program. Tonight, if you are tuning in, you're probably aware that we're going to be discussing medical care at the Battle of Gettysburg. And tonight, I'm really proud and happy to welcome our two guests, Rick Schroeder and Fran Fayop, licensed battlefield guides from Gettysburg. So before we get any further, I'll let Rick and Fran introduce themselves. Then I'll touch on a little bit about Seattle Civil War legacy and all of that, and then we'll talk Gettysburg and all kinds of fun and gory, perhaps medical details from the Great Battle.
Sure. Hey,
Rick, we start with you.
Well, thanks, Rich, and thanks so much for the opportunity to talk. This is a topic near and dear to a friend of my heart, and we'll explain why that is. My name is Rick Schroeder, or Schroeder. I answer to either. I am a retired orthopedic surgeon. I practiced in Johnstown, Pennsylvania for 33 years. My specialty was orthopedic trauma. So in this day and age, that means not a lot of gunshot wounds, some, but mostly motorcycle accidents, industrial accidents, motor vehicle accidents. I have been a guide since 2016. Both Fran and I do varied types of tours, but we have developed, I think for obvious reasons, this special interest in medical care in the Civil War, and specifically medical care at the Battle of Gettysburg. So that's me.
Yep. Hi, thanks for having us. My name is Fran Fayop. I'm a retired certified registered nurse anesthetist. That's how I met Rick years ago. And the last 15 years of my career, I managed the level 1 trauma surgical service line. So Rick and I discovered that we had this love for Gettysburg. Johnstown's just under 3 hours from Johnstown. So honestly, tonight when we get going, you're just going to be in the car with us. These are the types of conversations that we had. Don't be afraid to ask questions. If we don't know it, we'll make it up. Rick and I both passed our guide exam on the same year. And honestly, when we started, we said, let's not do surgery and anesthesia. We spent our whole lives doing it, but question after question after question.
Right.
And we soon discovered Rick's the only guy that's taken a leg off or a hip or an arm off. I'm the only guy that's put people to sleep and wake them up. And there's a lot of misconceptions. And before you know it, one talk becomes two, and before you know it, you're in Seattle talking to people about surgery and anesthesia.
Yeah. Well, so tonight's style is going to be pretty conversational. We're not going to handle this as a presentation. So again, like Fran was just saying, we encourage questions to come in. We're going to kind of paint with a broad brush and sort of see where things go with our conversation tonight. But as we lead off, I do want to, just for a moment here, I want to talk about the Seattle aspect of this. Like why is Seattle Civil War or Civil War Seattle even talking about Gettysburg, and battle happened 2,000 plus miles away and so on. But in the wake of the war, of course, men by tens of thousands move westward. Some 14 to 15,000 wound up in Washington state. These are the men themselves. This is not counting their children and families and so on. And right here in Seattle, we had in excess of 3,500 veterans that lived in this city and the surrounding communities in King County. And dozens of them had fought on the battlefield at Gettysburg. These men came here primarily in the 1880s and 1890s with their families in a professional career, and they became very important citizens in the formative decades of when this city was growing. During the Civil War, Seattle had just around 200 people. It was a village, wasn't even incorporated with a mayor until 1869. So it's in the latter half of the 1880s that becomes a real Pacific Coast city, and it's led in a significant portion by men who had experienced fighting in the Civil War. And so I like to just explain that while the battlefields, while Little Round Top and those fields and rocks that they stood on are quite distant, the war itself is really deeply embedded in Seattle's history, because these are the guys that those monuments are to, and that we go to see what they did on that battlefield and the sacrifices that they made. And then they come here and become civil engineers and mayors and police chiefs and governors and architects and down to house painters and carpenters and even retirees with their adult children. So that legacy and their identity as veterans is really embedded deeply in our Seattle history. And so here's just a few, and I'm offering these up for our local viewers. So as we're talking about everything that Fran and Rick are going to talk about tonight, remember that these names you see on the screen, these are important Seattle residents in those formative years. And these are the men that endured exactly what Fran and Rick are going to tell us about. Whether it's Edward Lind, here the second name, he fell at the railroad cut with the 6th Wisconsin. Edward Fowler fell at McPherson's Barn at the 150th Pennsylvania. John McDonald of the 16th Maine, who was captured and imprisoned the Libby prison, was a chief of police here in Seattle. The list goes on and on and on. John Scurry, the Confederate at the bottom, 11th Virginia, fell in Pickett's charge. He becomes an incredibly important civil engineer from Seattle's earliest days. So these guys are Seattle. These are Seattle's history. And here's photos of many of them. Just so you can see that these are the faces of Seattle history just as much as they're the faces of Gettysburg history and the faces of the medical history of what happened at Gettysburg just the same. So that's the context of why we're doing this with Civil War Seattle in these connections, because this is the history they brought as well in their luggage with their families, and their aspirations to come here to Seattle was also their history. So let's start off with one thing I always like to try to emphasize on my tours and talking with people is the scale of things in the Civil War. And I like to think that's something that maybe we can use to introduce the magnitude of the problem of wounded and injured and killed at Gettysburg, and then then we can get into kind of how it was handled in some individual stories. So why don't we start with that? And if you want me to pull the slides up anytime, Fran, just let me know and we'll
all right. Well, Rick, why don't we start, since we're talking scale, let's go really big. 720,000 to maybe 750,000 are going to die in the American Civil War.
Right.
But Rick, the majority of them aren't killed in battle, right? What happens to the majority of these people?
It's really important for visitors to, students of the Civil War and visitors to the battlefield, that they understand that 2/3 of people who died in the Civil War, that almost 750,000 people, 2/3 of them died of disease. 2 men died of disease for everyone who was killed in battle. And things that you wouldn't think about as a problem are killing scores of men as their regiments are formed, their companies are put together, and they're put in brigades. Things like mumps, measles, various forms of pneumonia. And as distasteful as it is to discuss, the leading killer in the American Civil War is diarrhea. And you don't have to think long and hard about
that. You're supposed to whisper
diarrhea. But bad water, bad food. You stop 90,000 guys in the same place for 3 days with a bunch of horses and mules, and things are going to get pretty foul in a hurry. So that's one of the real principles of the Civil War that you need to take away. At the Battle of Gettysburg, and these numbers can kind of get numbing, as you said, Rich, there's 51,000 casualties between the two armies. And casualties are killed, wounded, missing, and captured. I like to tell people on the tours that I take out there, if we're going to talk about this, that there's 7,000 dead soldiers on the battlefield at the end of the 3-day battle. And within 3 or 4 weeks, another 4,000 are going to die. This is a major healthcare crisis for this small Pennsylvania town of 2,400 people. The armies leave 21,000 wounded soldiers in a town of 2,400 people. 160 buildings in Gettysburg are turned into hospitals. It's a very dire situation for the citizens of Gettysburg. Fran, you want to add anything?
Well, but going from the beginning, Gettysburg, we're 2 years into the Civil War. Mm-hmm. I think when Rick and I start these talks, we are always amazed at how woefully prepared the nation was for this type of catastrophe to strike it. What do we have? 1,500 surgeons in the Army, and a third of them go to the Confederacy, something like that. There's only 5 or 6 thermometers in the whole country under the Army. There's only one military hospital conveniently located in Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, from Gettysburg.
Right in the heart of the Civil War.
And when Rick and I review medical journals from back then, most of the physicians are town docs with mustard plasters, and the biggest thing in the journals is care of pregnant women. And now all of a sudden they're moving to trauma level. Now, at the beginning of the Civil War, the care was terrible. The soldiers laid on the field for days and weeks, but now they've really improved, right, Rick? By the time at Gettysburg, we've upped it a notch.
Right. At the start of the Civil War, pretty much every regiment had their regimental surgeon. And like Fran said, that might be, Dr. Smith, who's the town doctor in a small town in upstate New York. By the Battle of Gettysburg, the Army Medical Corps has streamlined a process that worked variably well at finding people who could do this. But you have to remember, medical advances and the practice of medicine were very different back then. Another takeaway from the Civil War surgery and anesthesia is the latter, anesthesia. The misunderstanding, and Fran will talk in more detail about this, the misunderstanding that people had to bite a bullet or bite a stick is completely wrong. Quite simply, 95% of all the surgery in the Civil War was done under general anesthesia. It was available. It had been around for over 20 years, and it was commonly used. But what Fran is referring to is an improved system by 1863 that now the Army Medical Corps has put into position. And one of the individuals that's certainly my hero, and I'm sure Fran's, is the medical director of the Army of the Potomac under General George Meade, Dr. Jonathan Letterman. He has been on the job for about a year, and he has streamlined an extremely efficient triage system, record-keeping system, and is really one of the heroes of this battle in our estimation. Fran, you want to say any more about Dr. Letterman?
Well, Dr. Letterman, and the other thing that we've come to notice, we've had the honor of taking nurses out on the battlefield. And you don't see, women kind of feel like nothing happened here, but let's talk about what else happens that doesn't get written about. It's the Victorian era in 1863. The only time a woman is to see a naked man is her husband, or maybe when she's diapering her brother. But following this battle, we have nuns show up, and we have women in town that we know actually walk into some of these field hospitals, get disgustingly sick, and stand up, turn around, walk back in, and start nursing these men back to health. And you got to understand, you get a bunch of nurses in here, and I'm sorry if any of you out there are 18 to 24. I say, what's it like when 18 to 24 kids get sick? Look at Rick smiling. First of all, their world's coming to an end, and then when they get better, their hands are all over them. But if you read what these girls that take care of citizens of Gettysburg and none, what do they write, Rick? I made soup. I read the Bible to him. But you know what?
They wrote a letter.
The women step up in here, and we have a girl named Annie Etheridge who's, I'm going to try, Rick, if I get it wrong, she's a what?
Of a Vandier.
Of a Vandier, who is like the house mother with the 3rd Michigan. And when the bullets start flying, she gets a horse, loads it with lint to stop bleeding, and she's out on the field like a paramedic with a pair of pistols on her. She is so well. She gets a pension from the government for her service, and she gets a Kearney Cross for bravery. So when people think about the Civil War, they're always thinking about the doctors and the stewards who have a tremendous part, but behind them is women coming in and just cleanliness. Hi, Rick. They're all over this whole mess with bugs. We don't get it yet. We have anesthesia, but we don't have IV fluids. And Rick would be operating on people moving fast and furious, and he'll clean his instruments between patients, not because he wants them clean, because they're sticky.
Yeah, to get the dried blood off of the instruments.
Well, I have a.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Rich.
I have a question. Hopefully, this is good timing for it. you've talked about Letterman and the sort of preparedness of the town and so on. Was there, at this point, is there any disparity between the Union standards of care and development and that of the Confederates Army as they're coming into Pennsylvania?
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. And just like the combat generals who knew each other so well because so many of them attended West Point and knew each other, the same is true of the surgeons. The medical education of the surgeons for the Confederate Army was virtually the same, such as it was as the medical education in the Northern Army. Cities like Philadelphia, New York, Boston were commonly attended by both young men, largely men, from the North and the South. There were sizable medical schools in Richmond and Charleston, but pretty much the system that went into place, the bureaucracy, was the same for the Confederates as well as the Union. Admittedly, the Confederate medical supplies often were more scattered, unavailable, just because that was the theme in the Confederate Army for almost everything.
Sure.
Amy Rapp, I see your question. Yes, females were taken care of. The problem is we don't know that they're fighting. In fact, when they're cleaning up the charge of Pickett's charge, they discover a female there. And I know there's one in Vicksburg I can't think of her name now, but they accompany their husbands, they dress as soldiers, and when they get injured, what do? They take off their clothes to see the injuries, and right away they discover they're females. And they do take care of them, but I don't have a statistic on how many they would do. But for the most part, it's men more than females. But now that's changing with the new changes here in military. And actually, Rick and I do some work with the War College, and I went into a guy and said one of the problems that they're having are getting young men to treat females who are wounded, because if Rick or I get shot in the chest or in the groin or in the abdomen, they rip the clothes off, but it's you've got an issue there. They just don't have that worked out yet. But I don't know of a female not being taken care of. Do you, Rick?
No. Yeah. And I think it was a little bit more commonplace than we might have thought.
Yeah.
But if I can, let's go back to talking about Jonathan Letterman, because he's such a key figure here at Gettysburg. Letterman is born in Cannonsburg, Pennsylvania, south of Pittsburgh. He goes to Jefferson College, and I believe he goes to medical school in Philadelphia at Jefferson. He's a military surgeon right from the beginning. He isn't plucked out of private practice, but he's made the medical director of the Army of the Potomac around the beginning of the 7 Days Campaign in July of 1862. And he's now putting in a system that gets tested at Antietam. And Fran, you said the wounded laid on the field for days, at first Manassas, a week, and obviously injuries turned to death. By Antietam, the system is working pretty well. The injured were cleared off of the fields on both sides within 2 to 3 days. And here at Gettysburg, it's really running quite well to the benefit of the injured soldiers.
1 second. Pop up the slide 18. I think I have it selected there. Do you see it?
This one?
Yeah, hang on.
Or the other one? We're on 16. We can.
There's a picture of Jonathan Letterman in there. No, the other slide deck. I'm sorry.
Okay. Let's pull that one.
There you go, Rick.
Here we go.
Here we go.
There's Dr. Letterman. And you can see what's on the slide, but these are some of the things that he instituted. And some of them might not seem important. Some of them are obviously important, but important things like an ambulance system. At the start of the Civil War, it seems a little odd, but the ambulance system was under the care of the quartermaster department, not the medical department. And the quartermasters often were more interested in getting supplies to the front line than the medical systems or using those wagons for ambulances. He started a very detailed, and since Fran and I both worked in hospitals, and maybe many of the listeners do, I know this is hard to believe. He started the beginning of a very thorough bureaucracy and record keeping system. And that became very important because that's how people learned going forward. Fran, you want to talk any more about some of these things that he did?
Well, I think the biggest thing for Jonathan Letterman and his counterpart on the Confederate side is Lafayette Guild. 2 years into the Civil War, well, Rick, I want you, when I'm finished, to talk about how long it took you to become a doctor and how long it takes them to become a doctor.
Yeah, it is.
Jonathan Letterman and Lafayette Guild, by 2 years into the war, have had enough with the military bureaucracy. They didn't care what your rank was. If Rick was good at taking off legs and there were 6 legs that need to come off, they're Rick's. And if I was good at doing shoulders and arms, they are mine. Mm-hmm. Not only did they triage the patients and get them there, but they had not specialties, but they just knew who was good. And I guess in the first year, whoever had the highest rank would take whatever cases they felt like doing. But Letterman has said, no, we have this Hippocratic Oath thing, and that's what we're going to do. Rick, how long did it take you to become a doctor, and how long does it take them to become a doctor?
Well, the first thing to realize is medical education was all over the place back in the mid-1800s. There were, as we know today, 2 broad groups of physicians, allopaths and osteopaths. But there were other, if you will, fringe types of medicine, naturopaths, hydropaths, people who believed in treating disease with water process. There were types of medicine called heroic medicine. It was just very scattered. And one of the things Letterman tried to do with variable success was to try to get people in who had some consistency in their training. But as Fran and I found as we researched this, even at Gettysburg, that didn't always happen. Sometimes a body is a body, and they were put in positions to take care of the injuries and start the triage process.
But at this point, they are running as well as they can run as a medical system. Right. To this point in the war, and they're prepared for the battle. They have lines of transportation and communication and supplies that are short and direct, to more direct certainly than the Confederates. I mean, at that point. So this is for the Union medical side. This is probably best case scenario, right, for a battle of this magnitude. I mean, unless they had weeks to plan it out, but moving armies and everything, it seems like they're really. This is an efficient machine at this point.
It's efficient to a point, Rich, but Letterman faces
relatively, yes,
challenges because George Gordon Meade is interested in keeping the roads open for ammunition and troops, and he actually holds the medical corps back for a couple of days in order to enable the fighting arm of his army to get to the battlefield. And so the medical staff start out at a disadvantage.
Okay.
Fran, do we want to talk about Letterman's triage system?
You know what, Rick? What do you guys think if we talk a little bit of what the soldiers feel like in battle, and then why don't we do the journey of the wounded? And I think we'll get it in there. Does that work?
Yeah, that seems good. So,
all right. So take this slide down for a second here.
Okay.
So first of all, one of the things that Rick and I talk about, when you study Civil War, you see pictures of men like you started with. You see maps with arrows and lines, red lines and blue lines, but there's always people underneath them. I mean, we have 163,000 soldiers here at Gettysburg. They're going to live to be about 40. They're 18 to 25. They believe they're going to live forever. This is a strange thing that they're going into. They're mostly laborers and farmers, and they don't understand, and they don't get a lot of training, and they're basically sick. They've got bad water, like we talked about, and diseases 2 or 3 times. Now you put them into a battle. You put them into a battle where the whole world's nothing but chaos. Their whole world collapses in around them. When you start reading about stuff, you never get a full picture of what it feels like to be under fire, because they only write about it in onesies or twosies. As they start walking, they become isolated in the smoke. They're all by themselves. Their adrenaline's up. They can hear their heartbeat. They can hear their breathing. They can hear their feet on the ground. They can hear men around them. They can hear bullets going over their heads. They whistle, they'll say. By your ears, zip. As the adrenaline pumps through their system and they can't see, their hearing starts to pick up masked musketry, sounds like popcorn. They hear the sounds of the cannon. It makes a bell tone. They can taste the smoke in the air. There's the smell of urine and feces and vomit on the field, because with this much adrenaline pumping through these men under fire, that is a normal response. As the adrenaline pumps through, it moves blood away from their heads to the survival things. So that's why they start cursing and swearing and lose their social graces. They can't control what's happening to them. Their whole world is a 3.5-foot semicircle they can fill with their hands, and it's enclosing in on them. And when men get hit, a bullet hitting the bone makes a metallic sound, they'll say. A bullet hitting their friend's head or stomach sounds like a pumpkin rolling off. As they move closer to the enemy and get engaged, remember, these guys are untrained soldiers. Now, we estimate 137 to 147 shots to hit somebody at Gettysburg. The gun's hard to focus, hard to go. It fires a bullet about the size of the tip of my little finger at a low velocity. It doesn't have enough energy to kill you, only if it hits you in the head or the heart. But this is a strange world. And then they start getting auditory illusions. As the battle's going on, they can hear their mother calling them, their kids calling them. They start to slow down time. They can see things. When you hear soldiers say the bullet's coming, this is a thing that these soldiers are not expecting to happen to them. And when you're 18 to 23, getting wounded, it's not going to happen to you. It's going to happen to the other guy. And then once they're wounded, it's a whole new world, right, Rick, of pain and agony, surgery. Some of them are being told there's nothing we can do for you. You're wounded in the abdomen. You're not going to survive. Some of them will commit suicide on the battlefield knowing that they are so wounded. Some of them will do heroic things only because they know they've only got a few minutes of life left on this world. And with all of this coming, they're coming to the medical teams now. Right. Anything to add there, Rick?
No, that's a great description of what we think these guys experience. Could we put the slide up of the triage system?
Yeah, PowerPoint, the other slideshow. I don't know how to do them.
This one?
No.
Yeah, hang on. I'm going to back it up here. Sorry, folks. We're learning how to do. We're learning how to play this game here.
Right. These are some photos from the battlefield of Gettysburg, but they serve to illustrate the system that Fran and I are talking about that Dr. Letterman put in place. And it's basically a 3-tiered triage system. And Fran left that great description of what it's like to be wounded with, okay, you are now wounded. What's going to happen to you? The first place you're going to be taken to or get yourself to is termed a field aid station or a bandage station or a dressing station. It has many names. They are all over the battlefield. They are within bullet range of the enemy. So they're either in low places or behind rocks, as you see on the slide there, or just dips in the ground. Think of it as an ambulance without wheels. There is a physician there. He's one of the assistant surgeons, which means he's younger, less experienced. He's not one of those valued operators that we had on Letterman's list, but this guy is out there to do first aid. And when you're brought to the field aid station, that young, often underexperienced surgeon is making some very important decisions. He's going to triage you or categorize you into one of 3 groups. You have a minor wound, we will bandage it up and maybe even get you back out to the field. You are mortally wounded. We can't do much for you. And as Fran said, you're shot in the abdomen, you've got a severe head injury. We're going to put you to the side and try to make you comfortable. You're not a high priority to get off the battlefield. The highest priority to get off the battlefield is the 3rd group, the surgical group. And you have to remember, in 1863, abdominal surgery is not really feasible because there's no antibiotics. There is anesthesia, but there's no antibiotics. If you're shot in the abdomen, you're going to die, 98% mortality. A brain injury is a brain injury. So these are extremity injuries that are being triaged in the first wave back to the next level of care, which are division field hospitals. You want to talk about them, Fran?
Well, yeah. You know what, Rick? Keep talking. I want to get rid of one of these, and somebody's asking about Jackson. I want to get him uploaded. So you keep
Okay.
going, and when you see me go,
Right.
and I'll get in.
As I said, this is a 3-tiered system. You're taken off by a now organized ambulance system and taken to a division field hospital. Unfortunately for the soldiers in the Civil War, a division field hospital is often a barn that the animals have been moved out of. The sites of those hospitals are established because there's room there, there's water, there's roads, and the Army basically pulls in to the George Spangler farm, for instance, at Gettysburg and says, we need your farm for a hospital. And they don't really give the family a choice. But that's where the surgeries are done. The operating rooms are not rooms. They're tables that are doors on sawhorses, and they're outside. Why are they outside? Because that's where the light is. They operate around the clock, and they would use candlelight at night, which was why they preferred chloroform over ether, because ether has a tendency to blow up. It's very flammable. Do you have the next slide?
Excuse me 1 second. Can you take down your slides, Rich, so I can upload the M&M ones? It's saying there's only room for 2 shows. So when you take yours down, then I'll upload the M&M.
There we go.
Okay, I'm still listening, Rick. It's a great show so far.
Do you have a picture of Camp Letterman?
Yep, coming up here.
All
so
right.
once these surgeons are at the field hospital, that's where anesthesia is given. They don't have anesthesia out there now. Can a soldier have his leg amputated if it's hanging there by a thread? Yeah, because if there's no nerve endings in there, you certainly can do it. Tourniquets are the thing of the day. Give me a tourniquet before I bleed to death. Give me a tourniquet.
Right.
And all they're doing is shutting down the big arteries of the legs and arm. Rick, what is it? 30% of the wounds are in the arm and 30% in the leg?
Yeah,
Like 60?
they're evenly, the distribution of injury is about 1/3 upper extremity, 1/3 lower extremity, and 1/3 trunk, which is chest and abdomen.
And that's actually a pretty good thing to happen because you survive those.
Right.
Hang on here. I'm going to try to upload this other file here. All right, I can't upload it, so we'll just have to talk about the M&Ms. But yeah, and amputations are done early. And Rick, that's kind of still today, right? You don't mess around with open wounds.
Yeah, we know that delaying surgery in trauma victims is often counterproductive. There are times when you have to do as little as possible until the patient is in better shape. But in the Civil War, if you needed an amputation and you refused to have it done, the odds are you were probably going to die of an infection. 80% of all the surgery that was done got infected anyway. Again, there's no antibiotics, so it was an expectation that infection was going to occur. The surgeons in the Civil War were students of infection. I don't know how many people have heard the term laudable pus. What's laudable about pus? These guys were pus experts, and they had classes of pus. And laudable pus was the kind of infection that wasn't going to go through your body as what we call sepsis or blood poisoning and kill you. When you were stable enough after your surgery, you were taken to the final stop in this 3-level system of care, a general hospital. And these were often brick and mortar hospitals in, say, Richmond for the Confederacy, York, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. But at the end of the Battle of Gettysburg, there were so many wounded left that a general hospital was established just east of Gettysburg off of modern-day Route 30, which was then the York Road. And the picture at the upper right is Camp Letterman, named after Jonathan Letterman. And it was in existence from about 2 weeks after the battle until the day after Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address, and was closed on November 19th. So it was open for an extended period of time. Fran, talk a little bit about what the folks are seeing here.
So this is this is Camp Letterman today. That green. Can you see the pointer on my? Can you
I
see
don't
it?
see it.
I cannot, but I can put it maybe
No, that's all
mine.
right. On the upper
Okay.
right-hand corner is the marker for Camp Letterman. It's a field, and development is encroaching on it. And if it were up to Rick and Fran, we would try to find some way to save this. Maybe we'll get a shot at it.
Yeah.
But the map on the upper left is the map of the hospital. Half of that hospital now is a giant supermarket, and you can see how things are encroaching around this place. But it probably, Camp Letterman, in our opinion, has the first Soldiers National Cemetery at Gettysburg. There was a cemetery at the top of this hill, and what's
Right.
interesting about it, when you look at it, you'll see a soldier from New York, a soldier from South Carolina, 2 from Massachusetts, a Virginian, North Carolinian, a Rhode Islander. They're burying them as American soldiers, not as combatants, which is pretty neat. And then they'll pull it out. If Rick and I had our way someday, we would try to save it. But that monument on the upper corners marks Camp Letterman, and that road is so busy, people blow by there that slowly people are starting to get to learn that. But how about this next slide? If you ever saw a book by William Frazanito called Journey in Time, he has five pictures of Camp Letterman, and they're all like 8.5 by 11s. But what our friend Greg Dulac did in Johnstown, who's a medical photographer, he does medical photography, but I asked him if he could do anything. This is the first time you're seeing Camp Letterman in all its glory. That picture is about 5 feet, Rick, when we unroll it on the battlefield.
Yeah, here, I got my copy here.
There you go. It's a 5-foot picture of these things. Now, battlefield guys for years have been trying to tape them together, but he balanced it. So what we can tell you is this is a field hospital, unheard of in the Civil War.
Yeah.
Normally they go from they go to final hospitals, but here Camp Letterman is. Surgeries are going on, people are being taken care of. You can see the field tents way on the upper right-hand corner is the town of Gettysburg. But when Rick and I look at this under magnification, we can see some places that they're outside. The soldiers are outside, and we figure they're the ones that are coughing. Maybe they think they have tuberculosis. The second tent in with the flap up, there's 3 cots in there, so we now know there's 12 men to that tent, which is kind of cool. And if we go back in there and look, they're there, and you can also see on the front, there's a woman there who's one of the ones. They have kitchens that are running, and they're just. It's a shame, huh, Rick? They're getting all around the bacteria. They put the toilets downhill,
Right.
away so that it doesn't flow
So they
in.
drain. Right.
So it drains away, and they're giving them. They're just cleaning them in bandages and dressings. And then there's a guy named Herman Haupt. If you've ever heard of him, he's the guy that's in charge of the U.S. Military Railroad, who just takes control of this Gettysburg afterwards, and he has trains coming up bringing supplies, and then trains taking wounded out. But this Camp Letterman is quite a place. I don't know. What do you want to say about that, Rick?
It as a general hospital, these were not as busy with surgeries as the division field hospitals, but many of these men, with the infections they suffered, or it wasn't unusual when an infection occurred for bleeding, life-threatening bleeding to occur in an amputation stump. So they did do surgeries, not to the degree that they did immediately after the battle. But these sites for general hospitals, at least Camp Letterman, was established where it was because of what Fran talked about: railroad access, water access, road access. It was a very significant contribution to the care of these men. And the patients here are both Confederate and Union. The surgeons here are some Confederates who were left behind. The Confederate Army left behind some of their medical staff to care for their wounded, and they're working alongside Union surgeons. So they're doing what they can to take care of the patients.
Right, and the tents faced east and west. What malair, is that what they call it, Rick? Malair.
Yeah.
They believe that air was awesome, and it takes the bugs out. So these things have ventilation running through them. They're doing the best they can with what they know. I don't know what else is here. Yeah. Oh, when we talk about anesthesia?
Well, let me say one thing. If you can go back to this slide. So this one's especially interesting to me because my third great grandfather was in the 83rd New York Volunteer Infantry. He was wounded at Fredericksburg, and from that point forward, he was detailed until June of 1864 when he mustered out as a nurse/attendant, depending on which record you look at, for the 2nd Division 1st Corps Hospital, of course, later 5th Corps. And he was stationed at Camp Letterman.
Is that right?
Yes, until late October when he went on furlough, and then he went and rejoined the Army in Virginia. I have never seen a photo of him. There's not one that exists as far as I know, but he was there when this photo was taken, and he could very well be one of those individuals in the front.
There is a Confederate in it. If you look at the woman standing with the apron on,
right in the middle.
Right in the middle, there's a Confederate. Maybe that's him.
Well, no, he was a New Yorker. He's a Union soldier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
in that sea of tents, he may be out there.
Yeah, he's somewhere that was working that day, I'm sure. So it's fascinating to see it. I've never seen it stitched together. I've only seen the individual. So I'm looking at what he saw, which is remarkable.
You can see they have ventilation, they have drainage. It's a full-fledged. Any hospital you walk into in Seattle, it's Camp Letterman. There's supplies, there's morgues, there's surgery, there's pre-op, there's post-op. It's all here. It's all here.
Yeah. But this system really saved so many lives. It was an uphill struggle for Dr. Letterman to get this in place. He had a lot of bureaucracy to get behind. His Surgeon General, his boss, a guy named William Hammond, was instrumental in backing him up. But Hammond ended up getting in trouble with Edwin Stanton and led to some political issues. Letterman, in my opinion, when you read his biography, he kind of burned out. He resigned from the Army in the winter of 1863, took more of a public health position. He was completely out of the Army, I think, by 1864 or 65. Did move out to San Francisco, which is why Letterman Hospital used to be in San Francisco.
So here's a question that may be a nice segue to some individual stories.
Sure.
Fran, I know you have some officers we'd like to discuss. And Michelle Rankin Amos asked if officers and enlisted men had the same surgeons treating them, which goes back to the triage discussion before, but then it opens the door for us to look at some notable injuries and treatments on the battlefield with some significant names.
So let me do one thing. Let me show you one slide on anesthesia. Let Rick show his anesthesia kit. And then let's take this slide pack down and see if I can bring up our slide pack. That's a great question.
And I think the answer to the question is there were a lot of people hurt and they all got taken care of in a timely fashion without preference to officers versus enlisted men.
And Fran, we don't have another uploaded slide set yet.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's one still processing, but
here's the two anesthetics, ether and chloroform. And I tell people all the time, this is how anesthesia works today. You're awake, and you do this every night. You go to bed, and you're not awake, you're not asleep. If somebody turns the light on or throws cold water on you, you're startled. That's the purple thing, the excitement phase. They keep dropping these liquids on them, and the liquids turn to gas, and as you inhale them, it clogs up pores in your brain. That's the best as I'm going to do tonight. And it makes you go to sleep. It makes you amnestic and pain-free. And then what happens, they can do surgical anesthesia. And what they're doing, ether and chloroform, it's hard to kill somebody with ether and chloroform because you're administering it through your lungs, and you'll stop breathing before you die. So here's Fran. I'm dropping ether and chloroform on a person, and I'm looking at Rick, and as soon as the leg goes flat and his breathing stops, I take the anesthetic off and go, giving Rick 5 minutes to take the limb off.
And I think one of the things that has been a problem in interpreting this is Fran talked about this excitement phase. It happens when you're put to sleep. And Fran, correct me if I'm speaking incorrectly, but you guys give drugs now to prevent those contractions of the arms and legs that happen. Those drugs weren't available in the Civil War. So when Larry Jones is laying there while his buddy Leroy is getting operated on. His arm and leg might be moving, but he's still anesthetized. And
Right.
as a surgeon, I'm not waiting for him to be still. When he's anesthetized, if I got to have somebody hold the arm down as long as he's asleep, we're going to go ahead and do the operation because there's a whole bunch of other guys laying out in that field that I got to get to.
Right. And right now, Rick, how long would it take you to take a leg off if we had a vascular failure?
An above knee amputation, it takes about a half an hour to 45 minutes.
Right.
In the Civil War, it took 5 to 8 minutes. They didn't waste any time.
So the monitoring they did in 1863 is what they saw, what they felt. This is modern EKG and cardiac monitoring on the right. This is how they administered it. That copper thing is called a chloroform dome. The Chisholm inhaler is a thing with the 2 pipes at the bottom, and sometimes they just drip it over a cloth to put them asleep. Now, Rick, how about this? Here's your surgery kit. Could you still do a procedure with that baby?
Yeah, well, you certainly could. I mean, a lot of the instruments that we use in modern day medicine don't come in felt-lined boxes, but they're sterile on the back table, and they look a lot like what you see in that kit. The saws, the knives, it's virtually the same operation in a much cleaner and sterile environment than it was then, but the mechanics of the surgery are pretty much the same.
So this is an operating room.
Yeah.
Talk to the one on the left, and the one on the left is a Civil War operating room, and then tell them about the one on the right.
Yeah, there's obviously a big difference. Again, little to no appreciation or understanding, not because they're stupid. They just haven't discovered things about bacteria and cleanliness that surgeons and medical staff will with time. So what's being done on the left-hand side is virtually the same operation you see on the right, but just in a different day and age.
Yeah. Okay, so Rick, anything we want to see on these? And then I want to take this down. Somebody asked here, how did the poor surgeons go? So I want to get to this one. Why don't you do your ending in the middle?
Yeah, I think this is something that we always want to drive home is, when the fighting stops on July 3rd, it's still the work for the medical staff goes on for days. And many of these surgeons work themselves into a state of physical wreck. One guy lost his vision. Another guy would start to shake so much that he couldn't keep operating. There was a surgeon who died at the Battle of Gettysburg. His leg was ripped open by a hunk of shrapnel, and he died 2 days later. So these guys were in the line of fire on many an occasion, and their sacrifice is something that obviously Fran and I want people to remember. This is a great quote about Jonathan Letterman, fast forwarded to World War II. And Letterman's advances in the triage system are still things we benefit from in modern day trauma care, for sure.
All right, take the slides down. I'm going to try to get rid of this one and bring up the other one. Remove some studio. Let's see if I can put it in here.
Yeah, we have a list of some luminaries from Gettysburg that we can talk about their injuries, or even in the Civil War. People often
well, here's a comment that while Rick's trying to get Fran's trying to get these up,
and they are coming up here. We'll have them.
There's a question here that asks if the post-surgical care compared to today. We went through kind of the surgery compared to today, but the aftermath. Obviously the concern with infection wasn't what it is now. But what happened to not somebody that was so severe that they were at Camp Letterman for 3 months, right, but a little bit more average person who maybe had an arm amputated above the elbow or something who.
Well, I think that it's important to realize if we go back to what we said at the beginning, we were talking about the lower percentage of people when we talk about surgery and anesthesia. Remember, most people are under the medical care of the medical staff for infectious diseases, as we talked about. But post-operative care, there were dressings, there were nursing staff to change the dressings. a lot of non-scientific but important understanding of diet. Fran talked about that in backwards ways. I don't think they understood. They had different diets for people who had certain infections or certain wounds. The treatment of infections was very detailed and very evolving all through the Civil War. It was the biggest problem they faced after the surgery.
Yeah.
And then the transportation of the wounded as well.
Sure. Okay.
All right. So our slide deck's up. Go ahead and bring it up, Rick. First of all, I'm going to plug my friend. He he's getting an article published in Gettysburg magazine, and I'm going to pull that up and talk about the man. But somebody asked about Stonewall Jackson. My buddy Rick may have a better idea. Go ahead, Rick. Tell him why you think what you think about Stonewall Jackson.
This is
he
probably
wasn't in Gettysburg, right?
No, he wasn't. But he's the most famous general killed in the Civil War, at least for the Confederates. So, and it's interesting when you read about his injury. Stonewall Jackson is fired on by his own men when he's returning to the line at the Battle of Chancellorsville. He's hit 3 times, once in the right hand and twice in the left arm. The injury in the left arm probably severs the brachial artery. He's hemorrhaging. He is knocked off his horse at the time of the injury. He goes into shock. He's put on a litter to take back to the Division Field Hospital. He's dropped twice and lands on his chest. He undergoes surgery that night after he's resuscitated with some alcohol, probably the first time alcohol ever touched Stonewall Jackson's lips. But he undergoes an above-elbow amputation, is transferred out of the military zone to a hospital quite a ways away. His arm is buried on the way, and he dies of pneumonia about 9 days later. At least that's what we've been told. As somebody who works at a level 1 trauma center in my career, and Fran took care of these patients, we know that people who have severe chest injuries and go into shock and then get operated on don't do very well. The fact that this man had at least 2, if not 3 injuries to his chest, I think is what led to him dying. And we can quibble over the terms, but pneumonia to me as a physician is an infectious disease caused by bacteria or viruses. I think Stonewall Jackson died of what we call adult respiratory distress syndrome, or ARDS, because his lungs filled up with blood with what we call a pulmonary contusion. You still can't get oxygen in and out, but I think that he follows a path of somebody who's in a bad motorcycle accident and crashes and has 4 or 5 broken ribs and hemorrhages into their lungs. So, and the fact that he was operated on when he was in shock didn't help that matter either. So
today it would be seatbelt injuries. People sometimes, they get here and, the seatbelt and the airbag saved my life, but they got this bruise going down their chest, and next thing you know, they have trouble oxygenating. That's not Stonewall Jackson's chest X-ray, right? Rick?
No, it's not. No. His chest X-ray, I think, was totally.
But you know what? You're seeing that today with.
He's got 2 arms.
Yeah, when COVID-19 started, the bug was putting fluid in the lungs, and what were they doing? They were ventilating them with high pressure. That's what we do. We put you on a ventilator and a tube, make you unconscious, and we use all types of pressure to try to get oxygen to go into the lungs. But we have to balance it by making sure that the heart can still throw blood up to your brain. Right. So it's not a good thing to have happen. Let me see what else I have here. This one, here he is. This is Rick's article that'll be in Gettysburg magazine in January, we think.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
So John Bell Hood, if you study
wait, can I do my imitation first?
Sure.
In the movie Gettysburg, after the battle, Longstreet goes to see Hood in the bar, and he goes, "How did my boys do? Big rocks. It's just rocks." That's him.
Yeah.
John Bell Hood. But the rumor is,
gone around to the right
about John Bell Hood, they say, he lost an arm at Gettysburg. What do you think, Rick?
No, he didn't lose an arm. And if you study the Battle of Gettysburg, most people are aware that at the beginning of Longstreet's attack on day 2, one of his division commanders, his best division commander, John Bell Hood, gets an injured left arm, probably from a piece of shrapnel. It leaves his arm crippled and withered, and he had virtually no use of it for the rest of his life. And
I can't get it in.
And then subsequently he loses a leg. So he kind of this, we think this Monty Python-esque guy, I'm not quite dead yet. When I was reading some recently published, newly discovered medical reports of this man's injury, published about 10 years ago, and I'm reading the surgeon's report who did the operation. As an orthopedic surgeon, I'm reading this saying, this doesn't add up. This is not a severe injury in any way, shape, or form. I assumed that he had major nerve damage. None of that happened. It was a wound that went in the top of his arm and came out near his funny bone over here, but it didn't really damage very much. They didn't amputate him. They took out about 2.5 to 3 inches of one of the two bones. And by Christmas, this man has lost a leg, but his arm is working in a 95% normal fashion. He can grip crutches. He can move his elbow. His hand works normally. And the injuries that John Bell Hood supposedly sustained to his left arm have been carried through history and biographies of him, and have led to the conclusion that he had severe pain, and he was gorked out on laudanum when he ordered the charge at Franklin, Tennessee. And I don't think any of that is medically accurate. And that's what the article's about, going back through the historiography of how that injury occurred.
Do you want me to do the anesthetic death?
Yeah, I think you should do the anesthetic death, Fran. Fran never likes to do this.
Freeman McGilvery is at Gettysburg. Rick and I work in a journal, a tome, 90,000 surgeries called The Medical and Surgical History of the War of Rebellion. 90,000 surgeries, and I think there's only 72 deaths related to anesthesia. That's how safe ether and chloroform is. But one of the cases reported is this one, Freeman McGilvery. He is at Gettysburg, but he will be wounded at a battle of Peach Bottom, Virginia.
Deep bottom.
Yeah, in August of 1864. What he has is he's got a bullet hits his left index finger. So he kind of plays with this for 2 weeks, thinking it'll get better. But 2 weeks later, it's getting pretty infected, and they say, hey, we ought to take this finger off before you get sick. He agrees to it. He agrees to a general anesthetic to get this done. They start to put him asleep, and all of a sudden, he's dead. Now, when Rick and I work up these people, we work really hard to try to find what we call primary source documents. In the operating areas and even in Seattle, hospitals have a thing called a morbidity and mortality conference, where it's not subject to discovery. Attorneys don't. It's for hospitals to try to figure out what went wrong so it doesn't happen again. So Rick and I look at these guys with that vein, trying to find somebody who knows something. And Freeman McGilvery has somebody in the OR with him, or the picnic table, wherever they were operating on him, who reports that Freeman McGilvery, they were putting him asleep with the anesthetic. He took a couple of deep breaths, and then he just stopped breathing. And right away, when I read that, I said, Rick, it must have been the surgeon. He touched him before he was deep. But no, they were just taking the bandages off. Now, searching, I found, it happens in today's ORs. If a surgeon starts early or the patient is bumped or stimulated, their heart will slow down. We give atropine, but that didn't make the fit. But doing research, we discovered a couple of things. There's a wacky article in 1963 about the 72 deaths from anesthesia. Now, Freeman McGilvery is done 2 weeks after most of the major surgeries over. He's done late in the day in hot Virginia. And ether and chloroform, when I showed you those containers, are light safe. So chances are they used ether and chloroform that had been out all day, or was still, some of it was just deteriorating in the open air in Virginia. And when he took his 3 or 4 breaths, he instantly died from a gas called phosgene. And phosgene is a breakdown of chloroform, and phosgene is nerve gas of World War I. So just from the breakdown, and they described his death 5 breaths and gone. And that's how it was written. So we do have an anesthetic death in the Civil War, but it's the beginning of World War I because he dies from phosgene, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Anybody else in here you guys want to talk about?
Do you have anything to say about one way or the other myth or debunking anything about Sickles? Because I'm sure that's got to be the number one guy that comes up on your tours.
Of course we have Dan Sickles.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, and Daniel Edgar Sickles, one of the rock stars for the Northern Army. Yeah, right. We'll confine this discussion to his medical injuries. We won't say anything about him being a murderer or a philanderer or anything like that.
But we will tell you on Battles at Gettysburg, he's a great filler for that spot when you're going up to Little Round.
Yeah. Sickles' men are trying to defend the peach orchard that he's moved him out to. At between 6 and 6:30, he's astride his horse near the Trossel farm. He feels a thud in his right leg. He goes to get off his horse. His leg isn't coming with him very well, and he realizes he's been hit. He's been struck by a cannonball bouncing across the ridges over there. He himself writes, "I reached inside my boot and pulled my hand out. It was covered with blood, and I knew I had been injured above and below the knee." His staff puts him on a rock. They put a tourniquet on. He may have had such a mangled leg, they may have done the amputation literally there, or taken him to a division field hospital not too far behind the lines. But be that all as it may, and many people know the story.
Rick, tell me when you won his leg up.
Yeah, go ahead. His right leg is amputated above the knee. The specimen that's still visible, you can visit Dan Sickles' leg. You ought to, because he visited his leg. It's in a museum in Silver Spring, Maryland. It used to be called the Army Medical Museum. Now it's the Museum of Medicine and Wellness. But it's still visible. He would, as I said, go back and take people to visit it with him. He's a very famous and infamous personality on the field, but he certainly suffered a devastating injury. That could be saved today if there was no nerve or blood vessel injury, but it would require multiple surgeries to reconstruct that. And I've never seen a picture of Dan Sickles with an artificial limb on. I know that he endorsed one, but it's Dan Sickles. If he got paid to say it was a good leg and he never wore it, it's conceivable to me that that's exactly what he did.
Yeah.
Now our buddy Jim Hessler, I know that people say he was smoking a cigar going off the battlefield. I'm not sure that's true.
Yeah, I think Jim has kind of debunked that, but it's a great story. So
yeah, he's taken to a field hospital, and we're pretty sure that he picks one with a deep well so they can shill his champagne. We think that's pretty true.
And remember, he's injured July 2nd. By July 5th, he's talking into Abraham Lincoln's ear about the way it all went down up in Gettysburg and how he saved the battlefield and how that guy Meade wanted to leave. But by moving out there, he saved everybody. Yeah, okay.
Well, let me take a quick look in the questions here. So there's a couple. I think there's one that asks about how the tents and the supplies got to Camp Letterman. I think because it's established in the wake of the war. There's safe rail lines. You mentioned that was part of the choice of the site was the ease of getting supplies and humans on and off the trains there. Exactly. So that's pretty straightforward.
And one of the reasons that camps on that side of Gettysburg is that the Confederates burned a bridge that went into Gettysburg.
Right. The trains had to stop literally in front of where the camp is.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And then another question. This one's really specific. So let's hear with this one. Rosemary Lather is asking that she's referring to the Spangler Hospital book, that there's the term water dressing is used quite frequently. And what does that mean? What is that? Because it's used a lot in the book, she says.
Yeah. For people not familiar with that book, Ron Kirkwood is a good friend of ours in this medical realm. Go out and buy his book, Too Much for Human Endurance. It's really one of the best treatments of a division field hospital that's out there. A water dressing, we still, at the start of my career, we used dressings called wet to dry dressing. When you have an open wound, you put a moist bandage on there, you let it dry, and then when you peel it off, it takes necrotic or dead tissue with it. That technology has been largely replaced by something called vacuum dressings that pulls the fluid out. But it was an attempt to keep a wound from closing too soon, which would promote infection. And they literally would drip water, non-sterile water, onto the dressings to keep them moist.
So since we're here, Rick, let's talk about maggots and leeches.
Do we have to?
I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Whatever could help debride a wound. When you read about the aftermath of Gettysburg, the citizens talked about how they couldn't inhale without breathing flies in. So flies are everywhere on that battlefield. And if you're laying outside, inside, in a barn, outside of a barn, pretty soon you're going to have little larvae growing in your wound. And while it sounds repulsive, it's actually a very good thing because maggots only eat dead tissue and they will leave living tissue behind. The soldiers did find it somewhat disturbing that if they had a large infestation of maggots, if it was quiet, they could hear them crunching while they were eating the tissue. And they found that to be a little off-putting. But and leeches were used to drain blood out of legs. It's still a medicinal use of leeches by plastic surgeons today.
Well, let's as we end here, reaching behind me to grab a book, because this is my favorite book on the topic. Greg Coco's book, Strange and Blighted Land. It covers the medical side of it. It covers the civilian side. It's so broad-based. I always bring that book up as a go-to on this kind of topic. But perhaps you guys can offer, and we just referred to Kirkwood's Spangler book, what would be recommended further reading for a layman's study, and then of course, the medical and surgical history if you're really into it.
So that Coco book, Rick and I think eventually everybody will have access to the Visitor Center archives down there, and the archivist's name, believe it or not, is Heiser. And when we were first looking into medical tours, Rick was sitting there and he's looking. He says, "Boy, I'd like to do a tour of some of the hospitals around here." Now, Greg Coco, God love him, apparently he was a guy that researched like a fiend, but he kept everything on little scraps of paper. Mm-hmm. So when he passed away, the park collected them, and I guess there's like 6 boxes that look like the junk drawer in your house. So I have one of these boxes open, and Rick's going, "Boy, we got to do a medical tour." Remember, Rick, I pulled up 4 papers stapled together of Greg Coco's medical tour. Right. But his research is phenomenal. How he organized it into a book, I have no idea.
Yeah, the other book that I would recommend, Rich, is A Vast Sea of Misery, also by Gregory Coco. It's a deep dive into the hospitals. And just in the last year to year and a half, a good friend of ours from Johnstown by the name of Jim Gindelsberger has built on that book, the Coco book, another book entitled Bullets and Bandages, a very detailed study of the hospitals with great maps and pictures. And we can highly recommend Jim's book if you want to learn more about this at Gettysburg.
Sure. Now, if someone wants to go into this topic when they're visiting Gettysburg, do they need to get in touch with you guys to get you as battlefield guides, or is this something that people will be able to could get a good treatment of from anybody?
Well, I think the guides learn about this, but because of our unique past, we know a lot about it. And
sure,
I think, Fran, we can say if people call with a request for a medical tour, it often gets shunted to us if we're able to take people out. So we're happy to take people out. We can get access to the Spangler farm usually with a phone call to take people there. So if somehow people can get our contact information by calling the Parker, I don't know, even if you guys can put it up, we're happy to take people out.
Yeah, Rick and I
Okay.
do a program where we wound 4 soldiers in the wheat field, and then we literally drive to where we think they went to up to Camp Letterman.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
I think there isn't we have a 4-part program on YouTube by the National Civil War.
The National Museum of Civil War
Civil War.
Medicine in
Yeah.
Frederick.
Mhm.
If you look at their videos. So.
Okay. Yeah, I'll I can find those pretty easily. We'll stick links to those in the comments for people looking later that want to dig into this a little bit more, as well as the books. So do you guys have anything coming up as well? I know you've got something literally tomorrow morning, but anything else later in the summer or this year that you'd like to mention for people that might want to come out to Gettysburg for anything in particular, tours or programs or anything?
Well, we're going off the record. We do so much medical stuff. We decided that we would do a field program. It's been canceled 3 times or 4 times, but we're going to try it again in October. The Gettysburg Foundation, the Frosty Sons of Thunder. How can you not come to a program like that? We're going to follow a regiment from Somerset, Westmoreland County, and follow
Near
them all the way back.
Johnstown, right.
Near
Right.
Johnstown all the way back. So that's the next field program. The Spangler Farm always has stuff. They're open on the weekends. We haven't been asked to go out there. We've gone out there for the last 4 or 5 years.
Oh, they will, I'm sure. They will. Yeah.
But yeah, and you can just, call the park. It's a great time to be there. We are going to be shutting Little Round Top down probably by the end of June for about 18 months. But I always, I've heard people say, oh, I'm not coming out if that's down. That's only 6% of the park. And actually, the fact you can't go up there, most of us like doing it from Ayers Avenue or behind the Devil's Den because you can see it better.
Yeah.
So I just tell you to
Good
come
point.
out.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's getting late there in the East, so I think we can probably wrap it up here. We got people commented from pretty much everywhere in the country tonight, so a really diverse audience. John Heiser has dropped a couple comments in as well. So I really want to thank you guys for taking time this evening to come and talk to our somewhat West Coast centered audience. But I think tonight, because it's Gettysburg and it's amputations and maggots and all, I know we hinted at diarrhea, but maybe we can do a whole program on that down the line.
Yeah, we can.
But yeah, I'd love to have you guys back on sometime in the future, maybe on some specific stuff. I know it's hard to treat everything like this in an hour or something. But there's, I had mentioned some of these specific Seattle veterans. Might be nice to really hone in on some, some stories that reflect like a tour.
Send us that list and we'll see what we can find, and then maybe we can come on and talk about them.
Yeah. And I'll dig on my end from the Seattle side, and because I find a lot of stuff in their accounts here, newspaper biographies and things that you won't find anywhere else.
Right.
Where they're recounting, this happened to Gettysburg, or that sixth Maine individual or 16th Maine who had been wounded in the head on Seminary Ridge. That story is nowhere else except where he told it when he was quitting as Seattle chief of police, and they were accusing him of being a coward. And so he said, yeah, you want to talk coward? Let me tell you about July 1st, 1863. And so there's lots we can add to the narrative from these men. I think that's pretty valuable. So, all right. Well, thanks for everybody for staying up late in the East and tuning in, and Rick and Fran, thank you guys for joining me.
It was fun. Thanks, guys.
Hopefully we'll do this again in the future. All right. Good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night, everybody.